Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Mystery Bible on Podcast. For this episode, for you who are listening and watching, you can see that there are two of us here this morning. Me, your typical fearless co-host, Joel Geen, and then I am joined by my good friend, Mr. Alan Briggs. We're going to be covering a lot of topics today, but Alan Briggs has recently published a book called Anti-Burnout, and I'm very excited about this conversation. You may know him from his Right Side Up journal as well, which I highly recommend to people who are getting their lives organized, and we can talk about those things. But Alan is a speaker, he's an author, and he works a lot with high performance executives. And he's also a former pastor, so he knows Scripture well. We'll probably be getting into some of that today and give him a chance to get on his preaching and biblical soapbox that he often doesn't get to in other podcasts or in other settings. So Alan has a lot to say because he's worked with a lot of people who have faced some really hard things. And so this is going to be a fantastic conversation. Alan and I have a lot of history together. We've spent many, many hours in deep and meaningful conversation. I don't think anybody ever has a shallow conversation with Alan. He's just not that kind of guy. But it's Alan, we've been talking about this for a while. I was there for your book launch, cheering for you and some of the other folks who you brought along with you to their successful book launches. I've been kind of watching this develop. You've been watching and sometimes neck deep or elbow deep involved in my development over the years. So it's so much fun that we get to be here and have this conversation. Welcome to the Mystery Bible on Podcast.
Thanks for having me, man. This is going to be fun.
It is. I told you I was going to start with a really broad question, and I do want to start with a really broad question because I think you're the kind of guy who can have a field day with it. Mm-hmm. Alan Briggs, you work with high performing people. You've organized your thoughts. You teach people how to organize their thoughts. You teach people how to get out of ruts, but you're seeing trends in the world to the extent that it inspired you to write a book on particular topics. So as you lay your head on the pillow at night or wake up at 3 a.m, kind of thinking about what's going on out there, mm-hmm. What are you thinking about, or what in the world is going on the way Alan Briggs sees it?
All right. I got 3 adjectives I see in our culture right now. First is afraid. People are afraid, and that is causing tribalism, people retreating from relationship and isolating into small little tribes where they feel safe and protected and unfortunately divided and mean and grumpy and things like that result. But to say it's coming from fear. So people are afraid, number one. Secondly, people are exhausted. People are tired, whether that is from chasing their kids around or driving their kids around all week, following along with their devices, trying to get through every single email each day. So many of the issues that I help shape leaders in around, especially in this anti-burnout message. And the last one, so again, scared or afraid. Secondly, they are overwhelmed. There's so much going on and exhausted. And I would say, lastly, confused, where we're asking, what is real? What is true? We're having to fact check not just politicians, but what is going on with AI and who wrote this thing? Was it a bot or was it a person? I had a call literally the other day that actually started as a text, and I thought it was a bot. And it was like a real lady texting me about scheduling something, and it was written like a bot. And so I think we are so confused largely in terms of reality, like what is real, what is true, whether that's an email coming from a real human, a post, content that's been written, facts. And I think all that together is not working out super well for us. And I think is leading us into a lot of things we'll talk about around burnout. So I'm greatly saddened by it, but I do see hope in the midst of it as I see leaders taking steps to change. We're kind of getting sick and tired of being sick and tired in many ways. And so I always see potential of change and the uptick from that.
Well, I mean, those 3 adjectives that you listed, I was thinking, I jotted them down. And I was thinking, man, we could do a couple hours on each of these because there's so much there. That you mentioned tribalism, and that there's an obvious question, but I think a meaningful question of, well, what's wrong with tribalism? What do we lose if we all join into a tribe? Doesn't everybody want a tribe? Isn't that a thing that we aspire to? And then some of the other things that immediately came to mind are, we did an episode on AI some months ago, which in AI time frame is an eternity. But one of the things that we were pointing out as a potential for AI was that exactly what you described, that it becomes very, very, very hard to tell what's true. And I think there's something really insidious about this underlying distortion of truth, to where we're going, to where the fundamentals of humanity get called into question, which I think there's an interesting spiritual element to that when humans are no longer able to be clearly defined. There's some biblical precedent for that. And then the confusion, the exhaustion, that combination. But you brought into it an idea for a hope that there's something on the other side of this, that people don't have to live this way. So I'm guessing right now that in our audience of many, many lovely people, we have a great forum of active people. There are probably a lot of them going, hey, I can identify with 1, 2, or all 3 of those things you just said. Let's do a very quick shortcut straight to the end and say, what's the hope? When you see somebody and you're identifying this, and then we're going to come back and talk about how you see that and what you see going on and what it does to somebody and what happens if these things don't get addressed. Ultimately, where are you trying to get them, and what are some of the things that make a difference for somebody who's going, yeah, you just described my life, dude, but really, what are you going to do about it?
Whether you're a normal human or a leader and you're responsible for many people, I believe that we are getting tired of the status quo, the norm. And that actually tends to be good news in humanity when we get tired of that, because we have possibility on the other side. So every single week in talking with people around my fire pit, or here I run a co-working space in addition to my leadership coaching work, I see that people are so worn out on hype, but are hungry for hope. And what I say is there's one letter difference, but they're worlds apart. Hype is the idea of, next time this, and you got to come back, and this thing's going to change your life. And essentially like being marketed to every single minute of the day. Literally, when I hit pause on a show with my wife now, an ad comes up. Like, you can't even hit pause without an ad popping up. This is insanity, how everybody wants our attention. And we are exhausted and done with that. And so on the other side of things, I do believe there's opportunity. I think that we're starting to see, even like with our phones, we're starting to see that, like, man, if you want to remain healthy, you're going to have to put constraints and limits on yourself. And it leads us back to a conversation, not on whether AI or phones or distraction is good or not, or there or not. Of course it's there. And of course there are things that are bad about it. But the question is really, are we going to respond to that? And are we going to put things up where devices can work for us or against us, where our tribes can work for us or against us, where our own mindsets and distraction and resistance to those things is going to work for us or against us? And so I'm starting to see people pave a pathway. Not everybody will, but some fearless people at the front pave a pathway toward healthy life and healthy rhythms, whether they're based in their faith or not. They're saying there actually has to be a more meaningful, purposeful way to do that. My teenagers understand that spending all day on their devices leads them to a kind of dissatisfaction, and their brains won't be fully developed for many more years.
Okay, so we can all agree then that there are all kinds of messages being shouted at us, and it makes me think back to the days when I was in a very intense military training environment. One of the so first I underwent a lot of training, and then I was actually a trainer to help develop people. One of the things that we could do is you give somebody a lot of conflicting mixed messages at high volume all at the same time, and eventually they get to a point where they kind of freak out, where they're going, I can't respond. This guy's yelling at me. This guy's yelling at me. Somebody's whispering in my ear from behind me. And you can actually break somebody down through that process. Now, the idea is to do that in a way that teaches them how to filter out and focus. But it's a training process, because you can get high-performing, smart, intelligent, educated people, and you put them in that environment, and people would suddenly break down into tears in that. And we could craft that environment very specifically. So there, and that brings up the question of, is this being done to us? Is there is there something? What's your suspicion of? Hey, the world has gone to this absolute fever pitch, and I was looking recently at some inflation data, which is alarming or depressing depending on how people want to look at it. Everything in the world has gone up in price since the year 2000, except for internet access and televisions. Phones, arguably, depending. But the what it takes to get a 70-inch high-definition screen in your house is a small fraction of what it used to take even just 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so the amount of content and how cheap it is to get massive amounts of content into your house and massive amounts of data stream has cratered in price while everything else is going up in price. And I'm looking at that going, is that a coincidence, or is there something that's interested in making sure that we have a constant stream of just stuff being yelled at us and then to the point, as you described, where you're not even in control of it anymore. You don't even own what goes on that screen anymore, and you don't even get to decide what goes on that screen. When I boot up my computer, there's ads from Microsoft on my home screen telling me stuff and telling me that, why don't you go read this? Why don't you go look at this? And I'm going, I'm just trying to turn on my computer, guys. Let me have it. What do you think? Is there an agenda behind this?
And whether there is, sure, for some there's an agenda behind it. For others, we're literally just shouting as loud as we can to try to shout 5% louder than the other person. Yeah. And I mean, I share things online. I send emails. I send group emails. I advertise things that I believe will help people. I have a book that I believe is worthy of people's attention and time. And so I think a lot of it is the cacophony of noise is exactly what we're talking about. It's breaking people down. And it's exhausting. Like literally, if we don't fight and have a resistance, a proactive plan, which is you bring up the right side up journal. If I skip it for a day, I have mine here in a leather sleeve. Like if I skip it for a day, then I'm done, man. Like that day just disappears.
There's my leather sleeve one.
Boom. Smells amazing.
I highly recommend it.
Like literally when I pick it up this morning, I was feeling pretty overwhelmed because even my own brain, Joel, you need to accomplish these 17 or 27 or 50 things today. And then I look at my schedule and go, no, I don't. I have about 6 things. And a couple matter more than others. And no offense to all of your podcast listeners, but I can't leave my kids at school today. I'm the after school parent that is making dinner and making sure that family life happens. That's deeply meaningful. So not only is culture shouting that outward to us, but inwardly, I have about 15 things that I'm saying I have to succeed at this or else. And it's coming from both directions. So wisely, we need to set up proactively the constraints, the limits against that to then go, man, I can live within the safety of this. And I just think the leader that doesn't anymore, the reactive leader, is in overwhelm, which is pre-burnout. And literally it's such a slippery slope there. I mean, I don't think I'm overestimating that all the messages are coming at us and our brains can't decide whether that text that just went off in my pocket 5 minutes before we hopped on is an actual emergency or is just somebody that had a question about our conversation 3 days ago.
Or is it a bot pretending to be somebody?
Exactly. Yeah. Or is it actually a human? And I think it's a bot. I just think, unless we have a defense plan ahead of time, we're living on defense. We're living last minute. We're living, we're not going to find purpose. We're not going to find meaning. We're not going to find fulfillment. We're literally just going to try to survive the day. Too many surviving the day. And then again, we end up in this, why is everything so exhausting that's coming at me? So yeah, man, I think there's 3 levels of that. I think there absolutely is agenda coming at us. Then I think there's just the external noise, but we don't talk much about this, that internal noise that says, that's actually about identity and who I am versus impact, what I think I need to accomplish to be worthy and valuable, because I already am inherently in being a human.
So I want to ask something that sounds really obvious, but let's push this a little bit. So what? So what if there's a lot of noise? What if somebody says, yeah, that's me, but there is no handle on it? I mean, you've thrown some adjectives out there of confusion, exhaustion, overwhelm. All right. Well, isn't that just part and parcel of being a human being? Is that just the world we live in? In other words, what happens if nobody does anything about this? And if somebody says, well, I feel that way, but so what? I can take an extra drink. I can turn on my Netflix show. I have ways of winding down. What happens to a person that if none of this is addressed, or if they don't get a handle on it, what does it do to the life? And then after that, I want to talk about what does it do to the human spirit?
Questions are disarming, and statements are an immediate wall for defense right now. I think largely because of what we just described, those three adjectives. So I actually don't approach it through a statement. I approach it through a question. And I've got a sarcastic version and an actual version. The sarcastic version is, how's that working for you? But the actual empathetic, compassionate version is, man, based on what the good life is for you, Joel, or whoever's asking this, how well is that working for you to that end? And I mean, I think that's the beauty, is to say that, man, if somebody like lives to game, or they live for their, to be injected with politics and think through these things, then you can work to that end, and you can find that, to your point, for very, very cheap or even free. The entertaining ourselves to death idea, you can find that. But for me, I would say, man, that does not fit the good life, because so much of my life is about outward facing, serving others, inspiring them to live around how they're designed. And so I think that, in a beautiful sense, we all get to choose. And in a scary sense, we all get to choose. And it's sad. I'm often sad for other people when they choose a very small life compared to one, again, of joy and meaning and generosity that's outward facing, the kind of things that we've talked about many, many times, those themes. And so I just think the posture of questions is so helpful, because some people haven't even thought about it. Like, what is the good life? Like, what am I designed for? What is winning? Whatever phrase of that you were thinking of.
It's funny when you brought that up. I literally got a chill, and I'm not just being dramatic, but I did, because I remembered, I went back to where I was sitting the first time you asked me what the good life for Joel looks like. And it seemed like this very benign question. And I honestly I'm terrible at remembering time sequences, but this is like pre-COVID. I mean, we're going back several years at this point to when you asked me that. And I was sitting behind a very large desk in the middle of very busy days with, employees in the office. And part of the conversation we were having was like, I'm feeling something and everything's going well, but I'm unhappy. And you asked me that question, and I was like, I don't know, it's kind of an irritating question, but here's some things. And I described some things, and you just sat there and you made some observations. And I remember one of them, I don't even know if you remember this, but you said, it sounds like you're happier when you run more. You should run more. And
yep, I remember that.
I don't have time to do it. Since then, I'm coming up on my third ultra marathon since then, but it was just that somebody just had to say, like, I think you're happier when you run, dude. You should run more. Yeah. And that was like the simplest thing. I was like, all right, I'll run more. And
it has nothing to do with what you do professionally, but probably everything in terms of your creativity and whatnot. And what's interesting is that somebody else would be like, man, that's not me. I'm going to go walk around my neighborhood with my neighbors, or exercise for me. It looks like going to the gym quickly and then heading on. Like, it's different. It's also different in different seasons too. But what I love about that question is like, what is good? And good meaning like, what is true and beautiful and right for you? And when we think through that, again, if we have the wrong question, we're going to get the wrong answer. If it's just like, how do I win? Because you are winning in many areas of your life there. Yeah. And there were other areas where you wanted more, you wanted different. And that's true of all of us, man. And so if some of us are like the rest of us, then I look and go like, man, I have goals for my family for this unique period of time. I have kids from age 10 to 20 right now. And so I don't have that much longer of them in our home. So I'm going to say no to things that other people would say is winning. And they would say I would lose in that way to feed this thing that is part of the good life. And it all fits together. And that to me is to say, man, if my good life is being gone 80 hours a week and traveling on 2 business trips every single week, that's not going to be the good life for my family. But I have friends that's actually part of their story is their travel and the other things. And for them, they are actually able to make that fit and work as part of the good life for them. So yeah, questions mess with you, man. I mean, and sorry, not sorry if that kept you up at night, because that's the question that anchors us, right?
It's been incredibly helpful, but I want to take the other side of that question and say, Alan, who are you to tell people that they should just aspire to what they want out of life? Isn't that selfish? Is there like on what spiritual basis or authority can you possibly say to people to some, I mean, somebody could mistake what you're saying as, well, do what thou wilt, which I know that's not what you're saying, but that's a satanic mantra. Do what you want. And I know that's not what you're saying, because you're saying, well, there's good in this. What is good? And how do you fit into that? But how would you respond to somebody that's like, dude, I can't just do what I want with my life. That's not life. When you ask me, well, what's the good life? If I'm hearing, well, what do you want to do? And you should just do that. I could theoretically destroy my life in a weekend with 3 or 4 consecutive compromises or bad decisions. I could lose everything that matters to me. And how do you balance that? When somebody says, well, what's the good life? Well, I don't know. Do I go to Vegas and put it all on black and see what happens? That might be a good moment. Maybe not. How is it not selfish to even say, what's the good life? What do I want?
The answer to that question depends on your view of God. If God is an angry, grumpy uncle character who's looking over your life, waiting for you to make a mistake, you better or else, then the way you live your life will be defensive. It will be afraid. It will not be on purpose, and it will be trying not to lose. If the way that you view God is as one that I view, so this is where what I see in Scripture is a creator who invites us to co-create and who invites us into freedom. And freedom always has limits, by the way. And discipline is a piece of that. And when I see that, I look actually, what's the definition of slavery? So the opposite of freedom is literally when you stripped out people's agency or autonomy. And when God literally invites us to co-create with him, like he did Adam in the garden. And yes, there's toil, and yes, there's sin in the world. Don't hear what I'm not saying, but there's this invitation. And that feels a lot like freedom, maybe like permission. Like, hey, dude, you sound like you're built to run. That actually doesn't sound that exciting to me. I'll run for 2 miles with you, Joel, and then I'll be like, cool, I think I'm good. Like, I'm pretty proud of that. And
I've got everything out of this that I want. There's nothing more for me here.
Yeah. High five, you run 40 more miles. But that is to go, I don't know why, but that feeds you. You're wired for that. And so I think it's all that to say, it's attention. This is not a problem to be solved. It's attention to be managed of where is there too much freedom and too much space where I'm being selfish and not paying attention to limits or constraints. And then where over here am I just not accepting what God wants to give me, which is like, what's greater than literally working with meaning? Like there was work actually in the garden, to go off on a soapbox here. There was meaningful work in the garden to do of naming and tending. And I would just say like the tending, the creative mandate that people call it, to be a co-creator with God, as Adam is literally shaping what is happening in the garden. And lots of energy has been given toward we should create. We're in the image of God. He's a creator. But what about the naming side? That's predominantly what I get to do in coaching. That's what I was doing there, is naming something in your life. And I'm telling you, like, call me a nerd, but when I help somebody name something about their life, that is an incredible moment for me. And that's an incredible day to hear that moment freed you in some way. And creating and naming are incredibly powerful. I mean, there's the person, we've lost the power of names in our culture. But if you think about Jewish culture, almost all cultures, like name is a huge deal. In the heart of Africa, my friend is named Blessing. and he has to live up to his name in so many ways. We've forgotten that. But there is dominion, there is agency in actually naming things. I was the person at college, Joel, that would name people, give people nicknames. And it was incredibly fulfilling to be like, this, goofy little nickname 4 years later has actually shaped this guy.
Yeah.
But it's powerful. And we see it even throughout scripture, where it's like, no, you're not a weakling. Like, I'm actually going to build my church, not just on you, but on your proclamation of me. And then you see like Peter changes as his identity is formed through a name. So a little bit maybe off the beaten path, but all that to say that God is in the freedom business.
Yeah.
And many times we've misread that.
Well, you're 100% not off the beaten path. We're getting onto the really, really important paths here, because you're bringing up questions of what is God, and in asking that question, what not just what is he to you, but what's your perception of him, and then pointing out that really shapes our perception of what we are. So I want to speak into that for just a minute, because I know our audience eats this kind of stuff up, and I don't think I've said this in a recent episode. In that naming, you use the word dominion. Dominion's a very, very important word, because it was the thing that was given to us. In Genesis 1:26, we were given dominion over the earth. And part of that is Adam gets to name creation. Now, and in naming something, you speak an authority over it. So when you help somebody name something in their life, they're taking an authority and a responsibility over something in their life. And there's something very, very deeply human about that. When we can name it, when we can say this is here. And what's so cool about that is those perspectives are so powerful that if you actually look at different creation accounts, so if you take the Quran, for example, in the Quran, Adam did not have the authority to name the animals. But when God told him the names of the animals, this is the Quranic account versus the Genesis account, where Adam was able to name the animals. In the Quranic account, when God told Adam to name the animals, then the angels would not take Adam seriously until they found out that he knew the names of the animals. Yep. When they found out he knew the names of the animals, then the angels actually bowed to Adam in the Quran, which is a really fascinating way of thinking. How does this culture even consider what a human being is and what our relationship to God is, and the power of naming something? Well, then you take this Genesis account, which is a radical commentary on what is a human being, to say God actually said to Adam, no, you name them. You tell me what you think those names should be. And that speaks authority and dominion over creation to this thing that God made called man.
Yep. Yeah. And what kind of parent would not name their child and just say, like, we're just going to call you for 6 years. And then as soon as you're old enough and want to give yourself a name, go for it. Like, that is actually not kind to that. I love when science catches up to the Bible as well. And when we see things in science about even naming something new that's a molecule, is like, man, that is a breakthrough. And then we can do something with that. I recently had a blood test just to see what's going on inside there, and to name things. Hey, you're low in certain things, you're good in some certain things, and you're very high in other things. And that gave me this agency to be like, I can do something about that. I could drink more palm juice and eat more leafy greens. And I can bolster up these areas in my life. And that was powerful, because it shifted from this dietitian over to me. And that's what I see happening in science in many ways right now. Think about psychology. And if you go to a therapist, the phrase is, if you can name it, you can tame it. And it's so powerful when it's I wrestle with blank. Here's this word, not so that I can be a victim to it, but so the opposite. So I can actually moving from awareness into action. It sounds a lot to me like obedience. So once I know, then I can move in that direction. And it's like when a friend tells you a need that they have and you can't not see it. In fact, I'm trying to help my friend in a particular area in their life because she said, here's exactly what I need. I can't unhear that, Joel, because she's named it. And now I'm like, how can I participate in being generous? Because it's just in us to be able to do it. So I love when it catches up. Okay, let me tell a semi-inappropriate but very helpful story. I was in college. I haven't thought about this in years. This is a great conversation. And I wrote a paper. I was actually in a ministry training for being a pastor, and I wrote a paper on who God is. And I won't go into what it was, but I would say it was right, kind of correct, but incomplete, and maybe a little fatalistic. And God was a little bit looking over his shoulder for us to make mistakes. And I could back things up with chapter and verse, but it wasn't the kindest look at who God is. I sort of ignored some attributes. And I remember the teacher at the bottom of the page at the end wrote, "A, your God is an a-hole." And it floored me. Like, I did the assignment. I completed it. It was long enough. And I would say it was right, but it wasn't complete. It wasn't helpful, and it certainly wasn't kind. And so I got an A, but the way I was depicting my God was as an a-hole. And it floored me, and I don't remember anything else that professor taught much of.
Yeah.
But that moment I was like, whoa. And so how many times do we let what we believe about God limit so many of the things that are actually in God's essence and in God's character and the kindness and love? And so I think in that creative mandate, like, not all work is toil. I think we treat work like, get it done in 2 days and then move on. And it's like, whoa, hold on. Let's not swing the pendulum so much to the other side. Like, work is incredibly meaningful. And it was, again, tending and naming was there in the garden. And the hard thing is saying, what's the difference between really good work and toil? Or when does really good work turn into an idol where we're fighting for identity and then turn into toil?
That must have been, it sounds like that was a really shaping moment for you to have somebody say your perspective on God is, the way you're describing him makes him look like something that's offensive to you. How was that affecting your life? It makes me think there's this old Far Side comic, an old Gary Larson, where there's a dude walking down the sidewalk. There's a bunch of people moving a piano above him. It's hanging on the rope, and it's God watching this on a computer screen, and his finger is hovering over this key that says smite. And he's going, should I or shouldn't I? Because there's a lot of people that have that image of Almighty God, that he's just sitting up there playing games with us, and that, our free will is an illusion, our agency isn't true. And it not only changes who he is, but it speaks into who we are. How is that affecting how Alan lived in those years as your concept of God shifted? And once that was named, that, hey, your theology is kind of twisted here. How did that change in how you treated yourself and people and the choices you made? And there may not be anything overt, but is there anything that comes to mind of like, oh, I was doing more of this, and as that clarified, I started doing more of this instead, or I stopped doing more of the other thing?
The emotion was sobering, because I've always known since I was a kid that I had influence with people, that I could turn the mood of a room, that I could invite people over to my house and make them feel grateful for that experience. So whether it was 10 people or 100 people, I always knew that I had that. And so I just knew, man, if I don't share the right beliefs, if I don't share the right posture of God, if I don't, plant life-giving ideas, then there will be life-altering and can lead people the wrong direction. I think it's one of the most sobering things about leadership or being a dad. I walk in the house, and if I'm grumpy, then literally there's a thing called limbic resonance that everybody else responds to that, right? The one grumpy or anxious person in the room can turn the meeting grumpy or anxious really quickly. And so I think it was sobering first, but I'll tell you, man, where I let that sit for a few years through college and continued to kind of think, man, where am I missing it? And I had the choice to do what I thought was right at the end of college, or to do what felt like it had life and it was part of the good and the true, the beautiful life. And I had the opportunity to move to Colorado. Wasn't something like awesome. It wasn't ministry on the side of it. I just love the mountains. Like you love to run. I don't know why, but I just love altitude. When I'm huffing and puffing and the beautiful views, and I would climb mountains all day for one view. That's just who I am. It's weird, but there's a lot of us weirdos here in Colorado. And I made the choice to deny a job in the Midwest that would have been good and helpful to people, and my parents probably would have been proud of, to move to Colorado with no job, $400 in my pocket. Gas was cheap, so I think it cost me $200 to get out here. And so I had $200, no place to live, bummed in, with friends. And I felt the freedom to go do that because of how I had been understanding, like, for whatever reason, God put that in me. A few years later, I'd go to Antarctica. I had the opportunity to go then to New Zealand and Kauai and experience the world. And it felt very irresponsible. But I was like, I don't know why this is in me, but this is a moment. I have an opportunity. I have a season. I was single and I went for it. So I'll tell you, I never would have done those cool, like, life altering adventures if not. And I meet my wife here in Colorado. We adopt and then birth kids here. And you can see how those choices, stack and impact. So I literally would not be living the life I'm living if I did not deal with, in part, my wrong beliefs and posture about who God was and how he interacts with our day to day.
So I want to take that opportunity. First of all, thanks for sharing that. I think giving people something specific to hang their hat on is so powerful because it brings into higher relief what it is you're trying to describe. Of our perception of God shapes our perception of ourselves, and our perception of our relationship to God shapes our freedom and joy that we live in life. So I want to go back to something that I hinted at but didn't really drag to the surface much before. What happens to somebody's spirit if they don't address what you're broadly calling burnout, if they don't address the things that are going on in the world, if they never take control and have dominion over what's going on in their life, spiritually, what happens? And then after that, I'd like to get into, tell us an example of when you've seen that go really, really badly for somebody, because I know you've dealt with people in all kinds of situations. What is it about the human spirit that it's so important that we don't compromise on some of these things?
The most jarring phrase in the book is actually a definition of burnout. I don't know if you caught it, but my worst and favorite view of burnout definition is voluntary self-exploitation. I'm just going to let that sit. Voluntary self-exploitation. And we picture that somebody else is doing this to us. Mm-hmm. Oh, my boss. When I get in there with leaders, though, that's almost never the case. There are a few toxic environments that people need to get out of. Hear me say that. Most of them, we've created the toxicity. And the older I get, Joel, the more I realize that what we believe about something, we will actually make sure that that is still true. So some of you listening and watching believe that money is evil. And you will convince yourself that money is evil. And so you will get rid of it as fast as possible. Ironically, probably buying dumb things that we don't need. You will get rid of it as fast as possible if you believe that it is evil. Ironically, we will think more about it when we get rid of it and spend it on dumb things. Then we'll have to think about money more than if we would have thought about it intention of that. We will prove that that is correct. If that person on the other side of the political aisle is a demon, we will prove that to ourselves by finding articles and demonizing them because that's what we believe.
And the algorithm's very happy to just create a shrieking feedback loop for you. Yes.
And we could do that before algorithms with community, right? Then tribalism and our ideas, but is even worse now because we're swept into it and we think everyone's reading the same articles. They're not.
Yeah.
Ironically. And so, man, it's a huge question, but I just think we need to see it's actually connected to me. So nobody is saying, Alan, you need to answer 2 more hours of email. Like, I could have 2 hours ready the next day that could say answer emails on my calendar. But why do I feel like I didn't do enough today? And we're not curious enough to ask, what in me makes me believe that when I'm exhausted and it's already like my kids are in bed, I have to get some email done? It's here. It's an identity thing. I don't feel like I'm enough. And so many times what we try to do is when our identity feels low, we try to put impact in there and think in a culture of impact that like worships at this idol of impact that, oh, if I accomplish enough, then I'll be enough. And it never works that way. But the reality is when I feel grounded in my identity and I'm like, how cool that I get to have conversations with Joel and curate some things and coach some leaders today. Well, I guess I could go home. I'm done an hour early. And that's when I'm feeling most intact with my identity to go, I better get ready to be a dad for the rest of the day. Not the opposite way around. I have to prove to my family that I really love them by making $100 more and answering 16 more emails. Like, no, my kids do not care. They want their dad in that. And so I just think, how are we mixing up identity and impact? And when we can get those two working together and realize that they can actually be kind of parallel lanes, then it's beautiful when who we are can actually spur us to then join with the living God in actually doing meaningful things to partner with him, but also realizing at the end of the day, these are limits that I have.
So when you start talking about things like voluntary self-exploitation, we should ask ourselves, okay, what kind of person exploits themselves voluntarily? What has to be going on in that person? Because that's sad. And obviously the world can tremendously reward that. And I think it's fair to ask the question, well, why? Why would the world tremendously reward that? And it made, when you said that, it made me think of a couple of things. One is when you pointed out to me in another conversation we were having, you said, it sounds like you're driving down the highway and there's some warning lights on the dash and you can ignore them if you want. And then you just kind of let it trail off. Like, is that going to go well for you if you ignore the flashing warning lights that are there on the dashboard going, hey, there's a problem. So there's that. So what do you have to believe about yourself and your own value and your own worth to exploit yourself, to ignore things that are telling you there's a problem? And then it also made me think of some conversations that, unfortunately, that I've had to have recently. I'm glad to be in the position to help, but it's unfortunate situations with some younger guys who have severe alcoholism problems. And when you get, and I don't want to say this is true of anybody who's struggling with alcohol, but in a lot of these cases, what I'm finding is there's a fundamental self-hatred behind it. They don't care if they kill themselves. And they're entering a slow process of self-destruction where they know they're destroying themselves, but there's something in them that is believing that they deserve to be destroyed, and they're systematically doing it by pouring more and more and more in.
Proving that belief is true, which is why, like and A.W. Tozer says, the most important thing about us is what comes into our mind when we think about God.
Yes. So if we're thinking something that is completely wrong, and if it's leading us to a position of self-hatred, then we have to ask ourselves, well, where's that coming from? Well, I believe, and scripturally, you can make a real good case for this, but I believe there is something out there that hates me and that hates you, partly just because we're human and it doesn't like what God made, and this thing, whatever it is, doesn't like God. So what is planting the lie in my mind that, first of all, God's a jerk, and that secondly, I deserve to be exploited and destroyed? Well, those come directly from the pit of hell. Those are satanic deceptions. And when you're dealing day in and day out with people who are struggling with, it seems like God's an a-hole and I deserve to be exploited and destroyed, then when I was hinting earlier that it seems like there's an agenda behind it, is because I believe there's an agenda behind it. And I'm not saying it's, a politician with a twirly mustache agenda. I think there's something extremely dark, and something about the world today has gotten so that this dark satanic pit of hell agenda has gotten really, really good hooks into our reality right now, because people left, right, and center are just crashing and burning as a result of this. So what does that look like when you encounter somebody, whether it's a story with a great redemption or somebody who didn't do it right and it turned out very wrong? What are the stakes? What happens to somebody who who ignores the warning lights and continues to believe that God's an a-hole and that I deserve to exploit myself and that I deserve destruction? What do you see in people's lives, and how does it turn out for them?
The hopeful side, and then I'll go to the hard side. The hopeful side is that dashboard lights at some point come on. And somebody says something to us. A kind friend has a harsh but carrying conversation with us.
If you have a wife, she freaks out and says, "What are you doing?"
Sure.
Because she loves you and says like, "This isn't good."
Yeah. People often say like their kid, it's shocking to me, but it makes sense. The amount of times where a kid will say the thing that they needed to hear in their little, like a 5-year-old will say something like, "Daddy, I never see you anymore." Or some people have identified that they were workaholics when they're like, "Daddy, are you sleeping at home tonight or at the office again?" And they're like, from the mouth of babes. So I think the beauty is that warning lights often come on. And I think about, Jesus was so far ahead of his time. And if you think like, man, if you think everything Jesus said was crap, I'd be like, what? You don't even think that his philosophies on humanity were good? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Do you know how far ahead that is, those 5 spheres? So heart, mind, soul, body, and relationships. Like if you don't want to be healthy in those areas, I don't even know where to start, right? Like that's like a basic humanity conversation. But if we start with those, Joel, one of those areas is going to suffer more than the others. And so your body may shut down and you may be sick in that way. Your heart may be drying up and you head toward isolation first. Your soul, your dreams, and maybe your creativity and sort of eye for the future and what's ahead may really shrink, and you may feel claustrophobic inside of your own life. So there are going to be effects probably in all those areas, but I would say one is probably going to hurt more than the others. And then that's often a beautiful wake-up call. And people talk all the time about wake-up calls where they're just like, I didn't know that I didn't know. I didn't know that I was sleeping, right? I was a zombie and needed to be sort of shaken in that way. And that's often the beginning of the end. And that phrase, people don't change until the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change. Of people go, man, I cannot continue this way. This worked okay for me until it didn't. And I think alcohol is a good example because I think I'm not going to villainize it all across the, everybody shouldn't. And I think some people are predisposed to it. Some people can't do things well in moderation. I enjoy a good, well-placed alcohol at the right time. It's kind of, some dance to remember and some dance to forget. How do we use this tool? It's kind of like your phone. Like this could be incredibly life-changing. Like the best messages in the world, right? The Bible app is going out now to billions of people. It's mind-blowing. And so is porn, right? And so we love to villainize the thing. And I love, Joel, how you think, because you're like, what's going on behind that? And let's be curious, like, why do I feel at the end of the day like I need a cocktail? Or why would somebody feel like I need to go, relieve my mind by watching porn? Or why would I feel like I need to go medicate for 2 more hours of doing email so I feel like I had a valuable day before I deserve any sleep? That's the timeout call right there. And so I hear you giving us a call to discernment, and I love it.
Yeah, it's I think it in terms of naming things, it helps to for somebody who has a leadership or high performing disposition, which I think I fall into that category because I love pushing boundaries and doing things, and I've been able to accomplish a lot of things, and the Lord's given me a lot of capacity. Yeah, and you work with a lot of people like that. Then what happens when we get to a place of where we thought if we got here it should be good, and we're going, but it's not good. I actually don't like this. There's a couple of things that come up. One is there's an anger because we feel like we got lied to. And the other is that, and I think this gets overlooked a lot, there's a guilt that comes with it. There's a huge amount of guilt, personal guilt of why am I not happy with this? What's wrong with me that I'm not able to enjoy? I just got the car I always wanted and it's not doing it for me. I'll just say what's been in my mind sometimes, like, what the hell is wrong with me? This is what I wanted, and I don't, and I'm miserable, and that can turn into a self anger because there are many people, especially especially men, I imagine, but I've never been a woman, but I'm sure that happens with women too, where you look at that and that anger turns inward. You're like, I can do better, but get it together, get your head on straight, and do better, and we get into these. we get into these ruthless kind of cycles of
Yep.
get your act together, be better.
We would never tell that to somebody else, Joel. That kind of tone where like, come on, you moron. We would never tell somebody else that. I'd be like, hey, dude, like, it's okay. You thought the Tesla was going to be, you were going to be so happy every single day because you had a Tesla. And then you walk into work and forget you have a Tesla. Like, it's okay. And we would be so kind to somebody else, right? Mm-hmm. And be like, cool, like, how can that inform the rest of your life? But we treat people so much meaner than we would ever treat ourselves. And I also think back to that, it's to go like, God isn't standing over going, see, I told you, ha ha, you're an idiot. Why would you ever do that? But as opposed to like, what does that have to teach me? Like, what can I learn and transfer another way? I love that moment. And that's why I wanted to interrupt to name one thing. It's disorientation. We're oriented to believe success is going to do this. When we're young, here's the formula. And then I'm going to get this. And midlife, especially for men, again, I've never been a female either, but midlife, especially for dudes, is so disorienting. Because it's like, here, I got to this thing. I mean, you've built a company, Joel, and then you're like, man, but like I have these other things over here that actually are the good life. But for somebody else, they'd want the exact opposite, right? Your best day is their worst and your worst day is their best. And to think through that, to go like, man, it's such a beautiful opportunity. And almost all the leaders I work with are disoriented. Or why would you come to a leadership coach? Why would you want to think about meaning if you're like, I'm killing it? I'm like, cool. Well, do you have any tips for me? Like, I can't help you. You're literally living every aspect of the good life. Yeah. But they haven't crashed. I think that's the point. Yeah. Disoriented is different from a crash where your whole life is burning. It's like, let's pay attention. I've been oriented toward this. This is going to do it. Now I'm disoriented. And then the beauty is the reorientation. And that's borrowed from a guy named Walter Brueggemann, who talks about orientation, disorientation, and reorientation. And it's the mountain, and then it's the valley, and then it's asking, what's that next mountain? And how do we move differently, more maturely, wisely, with more discernment into that? And I think that's the beauty of the second half of life as well, is that while our body begins to break down, our mind and heart and soul know things that we just didn't know. And now we can move through life differently. So I actually think that's a beautiful invitation. But so many leaders think my life is falling apart. And I smile and go, your life is just now being put together. Yeah.
And it's two things that I'm saying this partly so I don't forget, because you're bringing up so many powerful things. It's almost like Jesus was ahead of his time when he said, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Yeah. And because we think, well, I do love my neighbor. I'm a good person. Like, yeah, but you hate yourself. And he's like, no, and Jesus is speaking to both of those things. And he's saying, you can't do one well without the other. And there's something really important about that. So when you point out, like, we treat ourselves frequently in a way that is really inconsistent with how we treat other people. And then again, that there's a fundamental lie in there. There's something at the core. And what we find out when we get into disorientation, this is the second piece, because it's reminding me of these extreme cases. When we get that absolute disorientation, there tends to be really, really, really severe moments where we don't know what to do. And I've seen this get, and this is obviously, we've gone beyond the point where this is a children-friendly podcast. It's not a children-friendly conversation at this point, but this is a very true story. A friend of mine called me standing on a stool with a rope around his neck. And I'm thankful that he called me. But the reason he did was because he just found out something about his wife that he had never conceived could be true. And you can guess pretty quickly what it would be. So what it did is it disoriented him. And he suddenly went from, I know how to navigate the world, to in a matter of a couple of hours, to I have no idea how to navigate the world. I can't do this, and I'm not going to anymore. So there's something very disorientation is so powerful. For what you're describing is there's a beauty to it if you can get through it and reorient to something that's more true and more accurate.
Yep. And it's in the heart of humanity too. Like the hero's journey, you watch any good movie, and it has it. You watch a bad movie that you can't connect with is because there wasn't something in the middle that put them into distress, that put them into disorientation, that hit them, and now they're up against a wall, and the hero story is just inside of us. And it's so beautifully told in the story of Jesus. Yeah. And by the way, there's an M. Night Shyamalan twist at the end that you didn't see coming either, like in the story of Jesus. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and so I'm thinking about this person, and he's doing very well today. This person who called me in that situation, because he was not an unhappy person. He was somebody who I always would have said, this guy's generally in a good mood. He's very positive. And what happened there was he's going through life saying, okay, if I marry somebody who's a good partner, and if I do things right, and if I follow the rules, then it will go well. Yep. And the thing is, that's true until it's not. And sometimes it's not. And when it's a really, really, really painful wake-up call, like your partner may betray you in a terrible way, then suddenly the entire framework of this is what I live in, these are my rules for life, this is what I've been doing, when that suddenly comes crashing down, you go, well, what am I doing here then? There's no point. And that's actually an extremely logical conclusion to come to. Right. But you can't stay in that place, because the process you're describing of reorienting, I think another probably a suitable synonym for it is maturing. Yeah. Maturing into a place of, okay, what I thought was true is not completely true. My framework needs to accommodate something bigger. And it's a painful, painful process. And there's something about the ages of, like, I don't know, 29, or I'll even say like 32 to 42 or something. There's something about that season, especially in men's lives, where a lot of that tends to happen all at once. And I'm guessing that a lot of the guys you work with tend to, and women as well, tend to be in that kind of life stage where suddenly they're going, okay, there's a bunch of things I thought were true that aren't true. I thought this would make me happy, and it doesn't make me happy. I thought that if I followed these rules, I would win, and I don't feel like I'm winning, or I'm winning, but it turns out winning sucks. Or something like that. And all of that comes back to, there's a truth at the core of it. We have to get away from lie and into truth, or else.
There's a philosopher and theologian actually from Yale, and his name is Miroslav Volf. He's Croatian. And
I trust him already, because that's an awesome name. I mean,
seriously, like a boss. Yeah. But he asked this question that arrested me. Like, when you're asked a question, you're like, why didn't I think of that? And his question is simply, what's worth wanting? What's worth wanting? He named a question that I then spent time dissecting and realized, like, several years ago, that growing a following on social media for me is not worth wanting. And so then is the question of, well, is it even worth participating in social media? And then, like, people are inspired sometimes by posts that I make with my son or my daughter or my family or whatever. And I'm not an influencer. Like, I don't make any money off of influencing people there. And it took so much pressure off, because it's like, no, I'm not trying to grow this thing. But, like, if you want to see pictures of, like, me and my kids eating tacos and, like, having fun in the summer, cool, jump on. Like, if not, cool, like, that's fine. But I see the pressure in somebody that's like, I have to get this following, I have to do this thing. We can see it in others, but we often can't see it in ourselves. And I think that question, I think, is one we need to be asking right now. That was the best part of his whole book, was that question. What is worth wanting? And we end up realizing that beautiful golden nugget of chocolate that we've been digging into is actually a chocolate covered turd for years. And it just does something to us where we're jolted by it, because I just thought, because the culture said, if you build enough money, if you have enough wealth, and sometimes too, like, Joel, when does a good thing become a God thing? When does our marriage actually become an idol? When do our kids actually become an idol? When does that company we built and provides jobs for 50 people or 100 people, but now that company's running us, we're not running it? When does that actually become then a God thing or an idol? And sometimes it's not that it was a bad thing. It's that it wasn't worth wanting, and it outgrew the significance that it was built for. And I think work has done that. Like, work is meaningful. It's super unkind to not allow my kids to participate in our family and have chores and work down the line. It seems like it's kind to never make my kids do anything. It's actually very harmful. And there's a reason why so many trust funders who don't have to work for their whole lives end up taking their lives, living the life that I think still kind of sounds like a dream life, like be on constant sabbatical, independently wealthy. Like now we're talking.
Turns
but
out
actually,
there's no point.
Yeah, God built like work, meaningful work into the fabric of who we are. And somehow we've turned it all into toil. And
I'm reminded of an interview I saw with a man who was a trust fund kid. And he told a story, and it was a heartbreaking story. It's very hard. It's kind of cruel because it's hard to feel bad for a trust fund guy. But you get, and he's not trying to make you feel bad, but you're
still kind of jealous, but then kind of sad at the same time.
Yeah, and this is true trust fund. Private jet wealthy, and he told a story of how he went to his dad, and his question was, "Hey, what am I supposed to be doing? By the way, like, what do I do?" He was literally saying, "What should I? What's my function? I should do something." His dad's answer was, the market for esoteric rare maps is pretty good. Why don't you just become an expert in that and just do that? And that was the answer to the question. And the kid, who had no interest whatsoever in like poring over, he's like, that's like, what's the point? I'm not faulting somebody who loves to do that. Fine, go for it. But for that to be the only answer that this father could offer his son in terms of what of value can you do with your life, he's like, you probably won't lose too much money if you get really good at this thing nobody cares about, and that's all you do. Basically, what he was telling him is, I don't have any ideas for you either. And it was there was just a crushing depression that kind of settled onto this guy's face as he told this story, because he still didn't have an answer to it as he told the story. He's like, so I'm learning more about maps. And I was like, it's like, that's the saddest thing I've ever heard. Like, for the saddest thing, because it should be, it should be different than this. We tell ourselves it should be different, but it's just an example of, no, there needs to be work. There needs to be goals. There needs to be something bigger than ourselves going on.
And I talk a lot about rest, but you can't have a theology of rest if you don't have a theology of work. So Jesus does pretty solid week's work, seasons work, however you see scripture, in creating the world in all these different movements, and then rests. And so we often love to swing the pendulum and to go like, oh man, we'll take all this time off. And I've been talking with my 21-year-old daughter about this. Like, it's actually not the dream life to be off all the time. Sure, something like a sabbatical, an extended break, a European vacation, awesome. But it actually has meaning in the rest because it had meaning in the work. And to reevaluate. And by the way, like, so much of the work we're doing will never be paid for. We shouldn't be paid for. I actually track like work in the community, because I realized I was like, I do a lot of work in the community, but I wasn't actually tracking it. And what gets measured eventually gets celebrated and gets done. And to celebrate at the end of the week, to go like, man, I invested this message into teachers that desperately need it, who shape my kids. Like, that was incredibly thrilling for me to not get paid to invest in the teachers that invest in my kids. Like, whatever that looks like, its purpose and meaning. Let's talk about work. Like, not all your side hustle should be turned into something you make money for, because as soon as you start to do that, then you lose a lot of the joy of it. And so to go like, man, and so I'm not just telling on myself, like, there are people who I invest in for free and coach, just like a lawyer may do pro bono work, because I'm like, if I see that this could actually unlock things in people's lives, and somebody literally is looking for coaching, but money's the only gap, like, we can figure this out. Doesn't mean I should never charge for it. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be a professional coach. It just means like, this is actually my calling for work before it's my career for work. And we just nobody's talking about this stuff, man.
The question that you shared from that philosopher, which was, what is worth wanting? I think I'm remembering it correctly. What is worth wanting? Yep. It reminded me of a conversation and I won't explain how, because it doesn't make any sense, but I wound up in the house of an elderly woman who's very wealthy and successful, lives by herself. She has this, it was almost like a fairy tale house. She's lived in the woods next to a stream, and there were animals, and it was like this beautiful little cottage, and she had been there by herself for a long time.
Were you
wound
in
up
a
having,
Disney movie? Was this real?
This is real. It happened.
Oh,
And
okay.
it's hard
My
to
bad.
explain it why or how, but it's real. And she's but you know, if I had a fairy godmother, she'd be a fantastic one. She's a very wise woman. She asked me a question in the conversation, and it came up. There's one of those questions that's just haunted me, and I found it a really, really helpful litmus test. She said something kind of in passing. She said, well, in that situation, you just need to ask yourself, what's good to have done? Which I don't even know if grammatically is correct, but coming back to what is good to have done. And in those moments, the more I think about like, okay, with my evening tonight, what is good to have done with my evening? Mm-hmm. Let's go back to, you know, a theme you brought up is answering 2 hours of emails good to have done. Almost always answers no. That's not the thing that's not what's best to have done. She didn't even say what's best to have done, because for somebody, I'm not a perfectionist, but I know people who are, and they kind of tear themselves up over like trying to optimize everything all the time. And I think that's an awful way to live, of like, oh, do I wear, you know, what's best? Are green socks or blue socks better today? By the way, without seeing you, I bet you have interesting socks on today. I know you do. So we haven't talked about that, but I know you do.
That is worth wanting.
Yeah, exactly.
Fun socks just for the heck of it.
There you go. So thinking of this, like, what's good to have done with this moment? I don't have to figure out what's best to have done, but to say, well, I did something good. And what I find is the more I think about that, it always comes back to, how am I treating somebody?
Yeah.
Or did I say something that was edifying to somebody? Or did I rest meaningfully? I was on a fasting trip by myself in the mountains just a couple of weeks ago. And it was something that had never happened to me before. Because usually I go up with like, all right, you know, the number of days and nights don't matter. But I go up with a specific, like, I'm going to be here. I'm not going to eat for this amount of time. I'm going to focus on prayer, etc. And I got to this point, this has never happened on one of these, where I had a beautiful prayer time. And there's peace came to me afterwards that said, why don't you go home and hang out with your wife? Like, because, you know, the kids are with the grandparents. Like, go home, go have a meal and hang out. And so I left a day early, and I had absolutely no guilt about it, because suddenly I realized that's a really good thing to have done with this Friday or whatever it was. Yeah. This is a good thing to have done. And there was and it was right. And it was the kind of thing where some years ago I would have said no, because then I broke my goal of, you know, I should have stayed for 3 nights or whatever. And
like where Christians get this wrong a lot, I've gotten this right. That's how I know, right? It starts with me, is that we actually over spiritualize something that we already know is good to have done. Like, would your wife want that? Is that in the heart of God? Of course it is. So I think about like exercise, for example. Like, I am more grounded when I exercise. I get great thoughts and ideas. I want to live longer. Like, I don't have to wake up every day and sit on the side of my bed and pray, should I go exercise? I have pre-decided that I'm not going to want to exercise at 5 a.m., but that it always ends better for me when I do. If I want to love people on the other side of a podcast or a coaching screen, or my kids when I get home, you know, is it wise for me personally to drink 5 caffeinated coffees in the day? No, because I get jittery and I'm not helpful to my family and I'm scattered when I get home. For you, that may not impact you. And so I think it's really helpful for us to go like, man, the danger here, I talk a lot, I've talked with you about this, the spiritual and the practical, is they're not fighting against each other. They're actually heading down the same road together to go like, hey, well, should I go to church or should I work out? And it goes like, hey, there's something beautiful about being with God's people. Why don't you figure out a way to work out as well? Or why don't you know? And it's a lot of the, hey, what about both and? What about both and? What if I could kick butt this week at work and also go and not answer emails all weekend? Like, what would have to be true to get there? Like, I don't really have to ask God if he wants me to do my work well. Don't do junk for Jesus. Do really good work. And then I don't really have to ask God, do you really want me to be present with my kids? Should I really like make them a good meal and be with them and be like, I just think too many times, Joel, we're so afraid of making a mistake that we forget to actually look back to the conversation about the God who we've gotten to know already. And I hope there's freedom in that statement somewhere. I'm not meaning to be condescending.
So I believe, and I know you believe this as well, that the time's going to come where you stand next to Jesus and the two of you take a look at your life together. And that may not be, in fact, I don't think Joel's theology, and it's informed, but it's okay if it's wrong in this case. I don't think that's the same thing as Judgment Day. I think there's a time where there's a judgment of, but I think when we die, and this is based on a lot of the people of this podcast know that we like the near-death experience topic. We've had John Burke on here twice. He's written a couple of books on it. I find it an incredibly helpful topic to discuss. But I think when we die, there's a point where relatively quickly we take a look at what happened, and I think Jesus is standing there, and I believe Romans 8:1, where it says there is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. So there's no condemnation here. But I think about this every single day. I think without fail, I'm pretty sure this crosses my mind every day. Many days it crossed my mind multiple times that I'm standing there, and he's going to say, "All right, let's take you. You did a tour on the mortal human earthly plane thing. Tell me about it. Show me what you did." And it's not he's not sitting there with a clipboard. He's looking at my life saying like, "Hey, what do you have to show me?" Now there's another layer to this, which is, oh wait, I'm actually doing that all the time with him because he's here. Mm-hmm. And if he's really here, and if he really is, he and his buddies, his pals, whatever, human, non-human, whatever's watching with him, and that's mm-hmm. biblical as well, is watching Joel and Alan have this conversation. What's their commentary running while they're having it? Like what is bringing joy to the God who is not an a-hole but who loves us? What is he laughing at throughout our day? What is he when we watch our lives? What's he going to be like? Hey, go back and replay that scene. Or, mm-hmm. hey, let's linger on this moment for a while. Mm-hmm. Like, what are the things that he brings joy to his heart? So, if you don't mind, I know it's a very deeply personal question, but when you stand with Jesus and you look at your life, what is he like? There we go. That's what I'm talking about. Show me that moment again. Or, hey, let's get some more of that in there. If you could take a time out and look at it today up to what you've done, be like, hey, do more of that. What comes?
It's rooted in my life mission statement, which is literally about partnering with God to help people design their lives. And if we're having a coaching session, Joel, it may be looking at your schedule and going, hey man, like if eternity matters, or if your retired years matter, then Tuesday has to matter as well. And time is limited. And that's why I love tools, whether it's a right side up journal or you've seen tools before. And like, I'm a tool geek, not because I'm a tool geek, but because, dude, if that can help you organize something on a napkin while I'm not there and make a decision that you don't have to be 97 like my grandpa is and look backwards. I write about him at the end of the book and look backwards. He's so clear about what matters in life. Don't wait till I'm 97. I'm crazy. But what if every morning I could be like, no, here's actually what matters, Alan. I know you get a little distracted when you sleep and you wake up a little off, but let's refocus each day. So almost everything is related to design. And what's interesting is I work like a designer. I think like a designer, but I wasn't artsy enough because I'm like not great at one craft or one trade. I would say maybe other than coaching and connecting ideas, I'm not really great at one craft. And so the kids in art that I thought were amazing artists because they can paint, they can draw, they can do this. And I'm like, I can kind of sketch stuff, but it's not great. I can kind of do this. I can kind of paint. But I'm always thinking like a designer. And I just think that like God laughs and smiles when I'm like, oh, Alan's woodworking again. I have my shelves decorated in the same color books over here. And it brings me joy when I see them. I don't know if anybody else cares, but it just brings me joy that I'm in this cool place popping with color in this cool studio that I don't know, it makes me happy to be in here. So I just think there's that piece that's like internal that's for me. And then there's the thing that's through me that's like, I don't know why. I honestly don't. That God allows me to connect an idea about physics to design, to coaching, to someone's life, to an idea here. I've said things here on this podcast I've never said or thought about in this way before because you pulled them out of me. And I just think that God loves to see me doing those things. And I only in the last few years, man, have fully embraced that to be like, this is the divine coming through me. And I just receive, it's a gift.
Yeah. And I love that answer because what you just described is a God who loves you and who actually cares to the extent that he's happy when something makes you happy, and that's good enough. And that means he's not an asshole. He's the opposite.
Right.
So you've come to this completely different place.
Phrase. Your God is not an asshole. That may be the title of this episode. I
may go with that. I'll get a lot of clicks on YouTube. It's great.
It's profound, honestly, man. Like I was so sincere sharing the story because, like, I think about a gift card. Like, I love giving people a gift card, especially if you're like squeezed financially and they tell me, because you can't spend it on anything else other than like, here's $100.
Yeah.
Like, that's a decent meal these days. Go spend $100 worth. They don't have to tell me what they did, but when they send me a picture and they're like with a friend or they're with their wife and they're just like eating a nice meal, that just makes me happy.
Yeah.
I don't need to check in on that. Like, what'd you order, man? And, did you get the cheap stuff so you can go back and get another meal from it? No, I'm just like, they're having fun. And I just think of God that way, to go like, I've given it to you and just like, go do with it.
Yeah.
And we forget that. So I love the question. I love the idea of God looking over our shoulder. Like, we're all quirky, man. We're all kind of weird. And God invented us in this way, designed us in this way for a reason. And like, what I see about humans, Joel, is when you're being exactly who God designed you to be, then in my best days, I don't copy that or feel bad that I'm not that. I go, man, if Joel's kind of weird, I'm kind of weird too. And like, I should go do my kind of weird. And then we find this kind of like freaks like me club and go, man, like that is actually the response to creativity and uniqueness. And embracing our design is not us copying, but is actually us freeing to go like, dude, like he is unapologetically him. What does it look like to be unapologetically me? And that I just think is beautiful, the way God built us.
It is. And there's something incredibly freeing about getting to that point of believing that God doesn't just love me, but he actually likes me. And that when something makes me happy, it makes him happy. Especially when it's something, it can be something nonsensical. I think, and that's one of the things we talked about with John Burke, is people they have these incredible experiences and they're like, Jesus is really funny, or God's hilarious sometimes. Like he makes jokes, and then you read the Gospels differently. You look at like Jesus actually like says some like snarky, sarcastic things in the Gospel. Like he zings people occasionally, and if you know the Greek or the Hebrew, you can see he does these little word games sometimes, and it is funny. And you start to get this other sense of he actually delights in my day to day, and if he delights in my day to day, and if I'm designing my life, to use the phrase to make sure that I'm enjoying some of those delight things along the way, that we can laugh about that stuff and share it, then I probably had a pretty good day. And if I'm consistently having those good days, I'm probably not getting to the end of the day going, oh, I'm completely burnt out, because I'm getting what actually matters in the right places. And that can't be taken away. Here's a gift card story. This is a true story. And it's funny because I hadn't thought about this in a while, but when you brought up the gift card thing, like I know that God and his crew were genuinely laughing about this. So many years ago when Rachel's my wife, when Rachel and I were starving students, somebody gave us a gift card to Melting Pot, which was amazing because to us that was like, oh, well, that's where rich people go and we're not those people. Yes. So we lived in Louisville, Colorado. And she was finishing grad school and I was working a terrible job. And a church actually gave us a very nice gift card to go to Melting Pot. So we went to Melting Pot, and we clearly didn't, it's not the place we would normally go on a date because we had $0. And at the end of the night, the manager came over and he's like, you know what? He didn't know we had a gift card. He just said, you know what? This one's on us. We're comping this meal.
Wow.
Which was really sweet. And we're like, that's amazing.
It's a double gift card.
Yeah, we're like, so we still have the gift card. And so later we went to a different Melting Pot and it happened again.
What?
So we got
Dude, you didn't invite me to the Melting Pot.
we got 3 meals, 3 awesome, and every time it was an extravagant gift card. It was, we're going back to like $2,007 and it was like $120, which that's a lot of money even a Melting Pot back in 2007. And so we had these 3, and we got to the point where it was like, we better go to Melting Pot again. And to the point where we're laughing walking in, laughing walking out, and just having the best date ever, because it's just, and if you believe that God actually likes you, then that he's like literally laughing in that situation in the kindest way of like, check it out, I'm going to do it again. And all the angels are like, you're going to do it again? And he's like, yeah, watch this. What? Like, what? Yeah, it was awesome.
I have a funny gift. I'll make it short. I have a funny gift card story. I literally was walking out of a movie the other day with my family. And when you see a Starbucks gift card on the ground, you're like, oh, somebody discarded their whole thing. But like, apparently I still have enough optimism that I'll like pick it up. And next time I'm there, I'll be like, oh, is there $5? Can I get one drink or whatever? So I pick it up. I love local coffee shops, not like a huge Starbucks guy. And then I take it in and go, oh, literally my friend walks up and goes, that one's on me. Hadn't seen it in a while. He pays for my drink. And I go, oh, do you mind scanning this real quick? Assuming there were $0 on it. And she's like, yes, there's $100 on that. And like, I drink a black coffee, a small black coffee. $100 goes a long way. And I promise you, man, the old me would have been like, oh, like I should give this to somebody or repurpose this. My wife makes fun of me. She's like, no, like just use it. Like that's for you. Like not everything has to be ministry or service. And some, I think, tend toward the very selfish side, but sometimes we can be sort of covertly selfish and like, I don't even deserve that self-hatred. God would literally put something on the ground or somebody would drop it, whatever happened. Yeah. And there's $100 that I haven't spent $100 in Starbucks in 8 years, right? But to go like, I don't know, cool. Whenever I feel like a bacon breakfast sandwich, I guess I can go. But I think it's cool to have this conversation, especially in light of where we started. And I think it's a heavy topic. It's a heavy season. That's actually the subtitle is a lighter way to live and lead in a heavy world. Yeah. And what's cool is we didn't plan this, Joel. This is a light, airy, fun conversation, at least for us. And I hope other people listening can have a little fun with it too.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a good place to let that sit with the audience, that the opposite of burnout is something that looks a lot more like the delight and the joy of living in front of your creator and knowing that he delights in these simple things, and thinking about those moments where he's like, go back and play that again. That was awesome.
Ooh, like I've got permission. Let me give permission to listeners. I think it's perfect in light of that delight. One of the things I talk about in this book, and I've probably told you this before, Joel, go waste time on a hobby. Yeah. Like wink, just going and quote unquote wasting time on a hobby. It looks like a waste to somebody else, but you come back just buoyant of like fly fishing. Like, I don't know why. Climbing a mountain. I don't know why. Going to an art gallery. I don't know why. Going into a coffee shop with good aesthetics, even when I don't need a coffee, and just journaling or reading. Like, I don't know why. And man, I think if you could just listen to this and go, you know what? I'm going to waste time on a hobby, and maybe you're a busy parent and that's you wasting an hour. I've got a store that I like. I rarely buy anything from the store, Joel, but it's so beautifully curated. And I just kind of walk through the store and people are pleasant there and it's got cool vintage stuff. And like, I'm not looking to buy. And it took me a while to realize like, I'm not overly consumeristic. I just really love places that are intentionally designed. And so whatever wasting time, an hour or 4 hours this week, that's probably a good action step to this conversation on delight.
Yeah. And I'll raise the bar slightly. If you really love somebody, get them the space to waste time on their hobby and push them to do it. And I think, well, it's easy to do that for my wife, but what about my kids? When's the last time I told my son who just started, I have 4 kiddos, my older son who just started school today, they all started school. When was the last time I told him like, hey, why don't you do whatever you want for an hour? Like that hardly ever happens because we're busy in my house. There's always something you should be doing, but when's the last time you get to just waste it? So that's a fantastic action step. Well, Alan Briggs, this has been an absolute delight. You and I don't get nearly enough time, but that's the life we have, and that's okay, because I think on the other hand we get just the right amount of time, and this was a beautiful way to spend an hour and a half or so catching up and enjoying this. Congratulations on the book. Congratulations on the all the incredible progress I've seen in your coaching and in your ministry and in the joy you have with people. Take a minute, tell our audience where to find you, what you're about, what's going on, where to find the book, anything else you want to plug or anything you want to make sure, and our dozens of loyal listeners will be all over it.
I would just say head on over to AntiBurnoutBook.com. AntiBurnout book, no space.com. Type it in, AntiBurnout book on Amazon. And I used to be a non-marketer because I'm like, oh man, like if you're supposed to read it, you will. But like, honestly, it's 5 years of coaching experiences really put into a book. And the question that shaped this book, Joel, was what if we could add a stupid amount of value and put it in one book? What if this could feel more like a coaching experience that you've had, Joel, and other people have had, than it does just reading information? And that has led us to QR codes, tools. We used to charge more for a single tool than we do for the whole book. And it links to 6 or 7 tools throughout the book. So I kind of boldly and audaciously say, I dare you to go read it or listen to it. You can get it on Audible. And if not, we have a Chipotle burrito refund. If you say that was absolutely not worth my time, we can't reimburse you for all your time. We will reimburse you for $15.99 or whatever the book's selling for this week. So I would just encourage you to start there because you can hear my story, my heart, my issues and mistakes and joys a lot within that book. So yeah, head on over there. Joel, it's a blast, man. Love seeing what you're doing, having this conversation today. And if anybody gains anything from it, cool. But it was fun enough to just have the conversation.
I echo that heartily, and I will tell our audience this is not some. This was my. I was literally excited to get Alan on here because I thought I know that this is something that our audience doesn't necessarily expect from this discussion, but I know there were some nuggets in there that they're going to love. And this conversation needs to be had because burnout is so real. It's so real. It's a clear and present danger, even for Christians who are living intentionally, who are even for people in ministry. It's so pervasive, and the dark agenda behind it is working extremely well right now. So anything that can tell people, hey, it doesn't have to be that way. Hey, there are some things you can do. Hey, you can reorient a little bit and get to the other side of some of this. You won't always feel this way is hopeful.
I love that you're emphasizing that because it is dark. It doesn't make sense logically. Why would we voluntarily exploit ourselves and work extra when nobody's actually telling us we have to? So I love that you're saying this is darker than it needs to be also, or than we think about it as. Also would just say this is actually not a Christian book. And I did that very intentionally. I want you to be able to share this with your friend, or maybe you're, in a leadership team of a business, and a business is not going to read a Christian book. And so just know that these conversations here are fun, but if you're a person of Jesus, I referenced that in the front, I'm certainly not hiding that at all. But I want to influence people in other zones because I do believe we have something to say about identity. I do believe Jesus was a genius. And I do believe that there are some principles and practices that I've picked up along the way from Proverbs that translate really, really well into our culture today. So that's kind of a disclaimer in a good way, is to say this isn't going to turn somebody off before they even read it.
Fantastic. Well, Mystery Bible On watchers and listeners, I hope you have enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. I believe you have. Go back and listen to it again and share it with your friends because this is a good one. Thanks, Alan, for joining us. It's been an absolute joy, and we look forward to the next episode.